In the summer of 1997, a network of underwater microphones in the Pacific picked up a sound nobody could explain. It was low and it was loud, and it arrived at sensors separated by thousands of kilometers, which means whatever produced it carried a staggering amount of energy. The researchers running those microphones named it the Bloop, and for 15 years, it was the closest thing monster hunters had to real evidence. I went and pulled the actual recordings from NOAA archives for this film, every one of them, and before we get into what made that sound, I want you to hear exactly what those microphones heard. One thing deserves saying up front, because in one important way that recording lies. What NOAA published, and what every retelling plays, is the sound sped up 16 times. The famous bloop is a time-lapse of a sound. The real event lasted close to 3 minutes, and its energy sits so far down in pitch that most of it falls below what human ears can manage. So I took NOAA raw file and slowed it back down myself, 16 times over, undoing exactly what they did to make it listenable and changing nothing else. Here is the bloop at its true speed, and it is a very different animal. The microphones that caught it have a story of their own, and it starts with submarines. Late in 1950, deep in Cold War secrecy, the US Navy began building a listening network on the ocean floor, a chain of hydrophones meant to detect and track Soviet submarines across whole ocean basins. The first full-size line went into the water off the Bahamas in January 1952. The system was called SOSUS, and it exploited a lucky quirk of the sea, a natural deep channel where sound gets trapped and can travel for thousands of miles without fading away. Here is the part I love about it. The array built to hear enemy submarines kept hearing the ocean instead, and operators even logged a mystery source they nicknamed the Jezebel Monster, which turned out to be blue and fin whales calling through that same channel. Once the Cold War ended, the Navy opened those ears to civilian scientists, and NOAA has been listening continuously since August 1991. 6 years after NOAA started listening came the sound this film is about. In the summer of 1997, hydrophones across the Pacific recorded the same low rumble, and the popular accounts disagree about nearly every detail. So here is the careful version. NOAA-owned pages describe sensors thousands of kilometers apart picking up the same event. The exact spacing is contested, 2,000 miles in one official telling, more than 3,000 in another, and either figure is far beyond what an animal call can do. About the source, NOAA could only offer a direction. The sound arrived from the Antarctic ice fields, the Bransfield Strait or the Ross Sea, possibly near Cape Adare. Nobody ever pinned it to a point on the map, whatever the viral versions say. Those are the numbers I could verify against NOAA-owned pages, and I would rather lay them out plainly than repeat somebody's retelling. To see why people reached for a monster, you need the scale of the thing. A blue whale is among the loudest animals on Earth, and under the right conditions, its call can carry about 1,000 miles through the sea, which is astonishing for a living creature. The bloop crossed more than 3 times that distance. What could possibly be that loud? NOAA scientists said the awkward part out loud at the time. On the record, the signal was far more powerful than the calls of any creature known on Earth. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the whole story in one sentence. If the bloop was an animal, it was an animal beyond anything in the record books, and that thought alone kept the monster theory breathing for 15 years. The monster era arrived in June 2002, when CNN picked up a new scientist story and ran it under the headline "Tuning in to a deep-sea monster." One theory on the table was a giant squid, many-tentacled and enormous. The idea had a serious problem from day one, though. Phil Lobel, a marine biologist at Boston University, pointed out that cephalopods have no gas-filled sac, nothing that could generate that kind of low, powerful noise. Even as he conceded you can never rule anything out completely, the caveats did not survive the retelling, the tentacles did. And to be fair to the coverage, Lobel himself still suspected a biological source, so the speculation was honest at the time, even if it aged poorly. Two things from that era deserve rescuing from under the monster headlines. NOAA own Christopher Fox had given these mystery sounds their names: train, whistle, slow down, upsweep, even one called Gregorian chant, and back in 2000, in one he was already saying publicly that the bloop was probably ice off the coast of Antarctica, just astonishingly loud. The scientists' favored explanation was ice all along. The monster was the better headline. Then there is the coincidence the internet could not resist. In Lovecraft's 1928 story, the sunken city of Arlaye sits in the same remote corner of the South Pacific where the bloop was loosely placed. It is a delicious coincidence and a meaningless one. The sound was never located precisely enough to put anything anywhere, so treat it as the folklore it is. The answer, when it finally came, arrived quietly. Between 2005 and 2010, a team led by NOAA Robert D. Zayek ran an acoustic survey of the Bransfield Strait and the Drake Passage, the cold waters off the Antarctic Peninsula, and they found that cracking ice is a dominant source of natural sound in the Southern Ocean. D. Zayek's own estimate is tens of thousands of icequakes every single year, from sea ice cracking and from glaciers carving into the sea. When his team compared those recordings against the 1997 signal, the match was, in his words, essentially identical, and the resemblance came with a case study attached. In early 2008, hydrophones in the Scotia Sea registered icequakes with spectrograms strikingly similar to the bloop, close enough to track an iceberg known as A53A, as it broke apart near South Georgia Island. NOAA went public in 2012 in the most understated way imaginable, an undated edit to a page on its own website, no press release, which a Wired reporter then confirmed directly with D. Zayek. To this day, the lab's own page keeps the careful hedge and calls the bloop consistent with icequakes, while the agency's public fact page states it flatly. Honestly, I prefer the hedge. What convinced me was never the wording, though. It was hearing the two sounds together. Here is an iceberg carving off Antarctica in 2008, sped up 3 times. If your gut tells you that is the same sound you heard at the start of this film, well, your gut agrees with the spectrograms. The bloop was only the famous one. Through the 90s, that same array collected a whole cabinet of strange sounds, and most of them yielded to the same explanation. Take the one called train, recorded in March 1997, a steady drone down around 32 to 35 hertz, now attributed to a very large iceberg grounded in the Ross Sea, dragging its keel along the seafloor as it inches forward. Slow down came that May, a moan that slides down in pitch over 7 minutes while a drifting iceberg runs aground and stops dead, and it registered on sensors nearly 5,000 kilometers away. Here they both are, train first, then slow down. Two more are worth your ears. Julia, recorded on the 1st of March 1999, is a long, mournful wail, most likely another iceberg, that ran aground somewhere between the Bransfield Strait and Cape Adare. Whistle is the genuine oddity of the set, a single wavering note captured in July 1997 by exactly one hydrophone. How do you triangulate a sound heard on just one instrument? You don't. Because locating takes at least 3, so whistle was never found. It does resemble the signatures of underwater volcanic eruptions closely enough that NOAA files it under those of volcano, probably heard once and never again. Here is Julia first, with whistle after it. Which leaves the sound I most wanted to end on. In August 1991, the very first month NOAA started recording, the array was already picking up long trains of narrow, rising tones, sweeping upward in pitch every few seconds and audible right across the Pacific. They called it Upsweep, and 35 years later, there is still no answer. It comes and goes with the seasons, peaking in spring and autumn. It seems to originate somewhere near a patch of suspected underwater volcanoes in the far South Pacific, and NOAA's own page, checked the week I wrote this, still calls its origin unresolved. The level has been slowly declining since 1991, and the tones are still detectable today. This is what an open question sounds like after 35 years. There is a quiet irony in how all of this turned out. The most expensive ears ever built were lowered into the ocean to listen for Soviet submarines, and they ended up listening to the planet itself instead, the whales and the volcanoes, and the ice slowly grinding itself to pieces. As for the bloop, it was never a monster, and frankly the real answer is grander. An iceberg tears itself apart off Antarctica, and the sound of it crosses an entire ocean. Upsweep, meanwhile, is still out there tonight, rising and falling with the seasons, waiting for someone to figure out what it is.